All right, so get this. Today we're going deep on something you might not expect: checklists. You're probably thinking checklists. Those are like for groceries, right? Or like packing for a trip.
Yeah, exactly.
But trust me, this is about to get way more interesting.
I'm intrigued.
We're taking a deep dive into the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande.
Okay.
And let me tell you, this book reveals how checklists can actually be lifesavers, like literally in hospitals.
That's pretty high stakes.
Oh, it gets even better. They can be game changers in finance and even like secret weapons for rock stars. Who knew, right?
You've definitely got my attention now.
So are you ready to break down why checklists are way more powerful than they seem?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This isn't just about remembering your errands. The Checklist Manifesto really dives into how our minds work, where they tend to fail, and this surprisingly simple tool that can help us overcome those limitations.
Okay, so Gawande starts off with this idea of contrasting ignorance with ineptitude.
Yeah?
He talks about how back in the 1950s, doctors didn't know a lot about heart attacks.
Right.
Treatment was pretty limited back then because they just didn't have the knowledge. That's ignorance, right?
Yeah, lack of knowledge.
Exactly. Now, today, we know a lot more about heart attacks, but we still make mistakes.
That's interesting.
And that's where it gets fascinating.
Yeah.
What's the problem now?
Well, it's not that we don't have the knowledge anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's our ability to consistently apply that knowledge correctly, especially when things get really intense.
Yeah.
High-pressure situations.
Oh, so it's not that we don't know things, it's that we mess up when it really matters.
Exactly. That's what Gawande calls ineptitude.
Ineptitude. I like that. And this is where checklists come in, right?
Precisely. They act as a sort of safety net. Catch those potential errors before they turn into something much worse.
That's a great analogy.
Gawande describes them as a cognitive net, which I think is so powerful.
I love that cognitive net.
Imagine like a tightrope walker with a safety net below. They can focus on all these complex movements, knowing that if they slip up, the net's there to catch them. Checklists provide that same safety net for our minds. They help us manage all this ever-increasing complexity in the world around us.
And he gives some really good examples to illustrate this point. One that stuck with me was the one about the study they did in intensive care units.
Oh yeah, the ICUs?
Apparently, patients in the ICU require an average of 178 separate actions per day.
Wow, 178. That's a lot.
It's a lot. And the staff had a 1% error rate, which doesn't sound terrible on the surface.
Yeah, you'd think that's pretty good.
But if you do the math, it's almost 2 errors per patient every single day.
Wow. And in an environment like the ICU, even small errors can have huge consequences.
It's a little scary when you think about it. It makes you realize how fragile things are, even with the best intentions and, highly trained professionals.
Absolutely.
And that's where checklists become so important. They bridge that gap between what we know and what we actually do consistently.
Where they force us to pause, double check, make sure we're not skipping any crucial steps.
He also talks about the B-17 bomber. I'd never thought about checklists in that context before.
Interesting.
Apparently, the original B-17 prototype was so complex that the pilot missed a simple step during takeoff and crashed.
Wow.
But here's the thing, they didn't redesign the plane or revamp all the pilot training.
Really?
They introduced a pilot's checklist, and it had a huge impact on aviation safety.
So simple, but so effective.
A simple checklist can be the difference between a successful flight and a catastrophic crash.
Yeah.
And that brings up another point Gawande emphasizes throughout the book. Even the most experienced professionals can benefit from checklists.
It's kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
You'd think experts by definition wouldn't need them.
Yeah, you would.
But the reality is, we're all human. We all make mistakes.
You do.
Checklists aren't about replacing expertise. They're about supporting it.
And speaking of experts resisting checklists, Gawande talks about surgeons being offended by the idea.
Oh yeah, surgeons, they're known for their confidence.
They were like, a checklist for me, I've been doing this for years.
I can imagine their reaction.
But the results speak for themselves. There's this critical care specialist named Peter Pronovost.
Okay.
And he implemented this 5-step checklist at Johns Hopkins Hospital.
Interesting.
The infection rate for a specific line infection plummeted from 11% to 0.
0. That's incredible.
In just 1 year.
Wow, what a testament to the power of checklists.
It really is. And what's interesting is Gawande doesn't just limit checklists to these life or death situations. He gives examples from all sorts of fields like construction and even rock music.
Okay, now you've got to tell me about the rock music one.
Well, think about the construction example first.
Okay.
The complexity of building a skyscraper. It's basically a massive checklist in action,
Which
right?
is a good point, coordinating all those tasks, making sure everything's done in the right order.
Right. And then there's the legendary Van Halen Brown M&M clause.
What?
Their contract demanded bowls of M&Ms backstage. But
Okay.
with all the brown ones removed.
Wait, really? If there were any brown M&Ms, they wouldn't perform. That seems a little diva-ish, doesn't it?
It does. It seems like a ridiculous rock star demand, right?
Totally.
But what's fascinating is it was actually a brilliant checklist in disguise.
A checklist.
Their technical writer was super complex, outlining all the safety and technical requirements for their show.
Oh, I see.
By including this absurd demand about the M&Ms they were testing, if the venue actually paid attention to the details.
So they messed up the M&Ms.
It was a red flag that they might have overlooked other crucial details in the writer.
That's actually pretty clever.
Right. It wasn't about being divas. It was about making sure the show was safe and successful.
A safety measure in disguise.
Exactly. And it shows how checklists can be incredibly versatile.
Yeah.
They can be used in life-saving procedures, but also in managing the chaos of a rock concert.
From the operating room to the stage.
It's amazing. And the effectiveness of checklists isn't limited to just these complex situations.
Okay.
Gawande talks about this public health program in Pakistan aimed at reducing child mortality in slums.
That's a really important issue.
They didn't try to overhaul the entire healthcare system or bombard people with tons of information.
Yeah, that can be overwhelming.
Instead, they focused on one simple behavior using soap.
Makes sense.
But they didn't just tell people to wash their hands more. They created a program that provided free soap and emphasized 6 specific situations where using soap was critical.
Interesting. So they made it easy and targeted.
Exactly. And what's remarkable is this program wasn't presented as a checklist, but that's basically what it was.
Ah, I see.
They identified these high-impact moments and created a simple, memorable system for encouraging people to use soap at those points.
And did it work?
The results were incredible. Diarrhea incidence dropped by 52% and pneumonia by 48%.
Wow, that's a huge impact from something so simple.
It really is. It makes you wonder why we don't use checklists more often in all parts of our lives.
I know, right? There's so much potential there.
Yeah.
But as we'll see, there are some factors that hold people back. Like resistance to change and misconceptions about what checklists actually are.
Right. We'll dive into all of that in just a bit. But before we do, let's talk about how checklists have been used on a global scale to address a really major issue, surgical safety.
Okay, surgical safety.
Gawande was actually tasked by the World Health Organization to find ways to reduce avoidable deaths from surgery.
That's a big responsibility.
It is, and I was surprised to learn that surgery, for all its advancements, still has a high rate of complications and even deaths.
That's concerning.
It is. It seems like the perfect opportunity for checklists to make a real difference.
Yeah, you would think so. And Gawande thought so too. But as we'll see, the journey of implementing the WHO Safe Surgery Checklist was not straightforward. He encountered a lot of challenges and learned some valuable lessons about checklist design along the way.
All right, so let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and unpack all of that.
I'm ready when you are.
All right, so we're back and we've been talking about the surprising power of checklists, from ICUs to rock concerts. But it's not as simple as just, scribbling down a to-do list, is it?
Not quite. There's definitely an art to designing checklists that actually work. And Gawande's experience with the World Health Organization's Safe Surgery Checklist is a great example of that.
Yeah, his initial checklist, it was well-intentioned, but it was too long.
Yeah.
It kind of disrupted the flow of surgery.
Right. It highlights a key point. Checklists need to be designed carefully to fit the context they're being used in. You can't just have this one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. It has to make sense for the situation. And he actually had to go back to the drawing board and look for inspiration from, of all places, the aviation industry.
It makes sense when you think about it. Pilots have been using checklists for decades to ensure safety and efficiency in a very high-stakes environment.
Yeah, that's true.
And those checklists, they've evolved over time through testing and refinement. So there's a lot we can learn from them.
So what did he learn from those pilots' checklists? What were the key takeaways?
Well, one big thing was the importance of being concise and really focused. A good checklist doesn't try to cover every single tiny detail. It highlights the essential steps that are most prone to error or oversight.
So it's not about being comprehensive, it's about being strategic.
Exactly. Think of it like a roadmap. It doesn't show every single house or tree along the way, right?
Right.
It shows you the main roads and landmarks to get you where you need to go.
So you're identifying those critical control points, those moments where things could go wrong.
Yeah, and building in those safety checks.
Yeah.
But then the question becomes, how do you design a checklist that actually makes the workflow better instead of hindering it.
Yeah, that's a good point because you don't want it to slow things down.
Right, so there's this distinction between do confirm and read-do checklists.
Okay, I'm listening.
Do confirm checklists are used to verify that tasks have already been done correctly. So the team performs their duties as usual, and then they pause at certain points to confirm they haven't missed anything crucial.
So it's like a built-in double-check system.
Yeah, you're not really adding extra steps, you're just integrating verification into the existing process.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about redo checklists? How are those different?
Redo checklists are more like following a recipe.
Hmm.
Each step is outlined, and you complete them in that specific order.
Like step 1, step 2, step 3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This approach is helpful for tasks that have a really specific sequence that needs to be followed precisely.
Okay, so the type of checklist depends on the nature of the task.
Exactly. It's not one size fits all.
But are there any other best practices for designing effective checklists across the board?
Oh, absolutely. Clarity is key. Each item on the checklist should be worded in a way that's simple and unambiguous, leaving no room for misinterpretation.
Yeah, you don't want any confusion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it should be visually clear and easy to navigate,
Right.
especially in high-pressure situations.
Hmm.
Imagine a surgeon in the middle of a complex procedure. They need to be able to glance at the checklist and immediately know what to do.
Makes sense. And I imagine the length of the checklist matters too. Nobody wants to be bogged down with this massive document.
Of course, an effective checklist is as brief as possible while still covering the most critical points. It's about enhancing the user's cognitive abilities, not overloading them.
It's about helping, not hindering.
Exactly. And this reminds me of that public health program in Pakistan we talked about earlier.
The soap one?
Right. They didn't create some huge, complicated hygiene manual. They focused on 6 key situations where using soap was most important.
Right. It was simple and memorable.
Exactly. That's a great example of simplicity and clarity in action. And speaking of clarity, the visual design of checklists can make a big difference too.
Yeah, think about those pre-flight checklist pilots use. They're designed to be easily readable and scannable, even in a dimly lit cockpit.
Exactly. It's not just about what you say, it's about how you present it.
Presentation matters.
Absolutely. And that principle applies to any checklist, whether it's for surgery construction or even your daily to-do list.
So we've talked about the science of checklist design, but what about the human element?
Ah, yes, the human factor.
We talked about how some surgeons were resistant to using checklists. Why do you think there's sometimes this pushback against such a seemingly simple and beneficial tool?
It's complicated. There are a lot of factors involved. In some cases, it comes down to ego. Experienced professionals might feel like checklists are an insult to their expertise.
Right, like, I've been doing this for years. I don't need a list to tell me what to do.
Exactly. It can feel like their competence is being questioned. But as we've seen, checklists aren't about replacing expertise. They're about augmenting it.
It's about recognizing that we all make mistakes, even the best of us.
Precisely.
Huh.
And sometimes the resistance stems from a misunderstanding of what checklists are really about. They're not about blind obedience or stifling creativity.
Okay, so what are they about?
They're about creating a system that supports consistent excellence and frees our minds to focus on the truly complex and challenging aspects of our work.
So it's about shifting that mindset from seeing checklists as constraints to seeing them as tools for empowerment.
Absolutely. They help us perform at our best, even under pressure.
And when they're implemented effectively, they can even foster a sense of teamwork and shared responsibility.
Right. They create a common language and a framework for collaboration.
Yep.
Think about those surgical checklists. They involve the entire surgical team, not just the surgeon.
It's a team effort.
Exactly. It's not just the surgeon's checklist, it's the team's checklist. They're all working together to ensure the patient's safety.
And that sense of shared responsibility can be really powerful.
It is. It's about moving away from the hero narrative and embracing the power of collective intelligence and disciplined execution.
Okay, speaking of heroes, Gawande uses the story of Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson, to illustrate this point.
It's a great example. It's a story we often hear about Captain Sullenberger's amazing piloting skills. But what's often overlooked is the role of checklists in that successful outcome.
Right, everyone focuses on the hero, but it's the systems that enable those heroic moments.
Exactly. As soon as those engines failed, Sullenberger and his co-pilot, they immediately turned to their checklists, even though they'd never flown together before.
Wow.
It was that disciplined adherence to procedure that allowed them to work together so effectively and land that plane safely.
So checklists provide that framework for disciplined execution.
Precisely. They help us stay focused and avoid those panic-induced errors that can be so catastrophic They're like a mental roadmap for navigating those tough situations.
So it's not just about preventing errors, it's about enabling success.
Absolutely. Checklists empower us to perform at our best when the stakes are high. And that's a message that goes way beyond aviation or surgery. It applies to any field where we have complexity and human fallibility.
So it's not just for certain professions, it's for everyone.
Exactly. Whether you're a chef, a musician, an entrepreneur, or just trying to manage your daily life, checklists can be a valuable tool for achieving consistent excellence.
It's about recognizing that we all have limitations, and checklists can help us overcome those and achieve really remarkable things.
It's a powerful idea, isn't it? By embracing something as simple as a checklist, we can unlock our potential and do things we might have thought were impossible.
That's a great point. And it leads us to a crucial question. What are some areas in our own lives where we could benefit from incorporating checklists? What are those tasks or decisions that feel overwhelming or prone to error, or just plain chaotic? So we're back, and we've been spending this episode exploring all the ins and outs of the Checklist Manifesto, and honestly, my view on checklists has totally changed.
Yeah, it's a real eye-opener, isn't it?
I used to think they were like just for groceries or something, but now I see them as this powerful tool, for managing complexity and achieving excellence in so many different areas.
Absolutely. And the best part is this isn't just some theory. The Gawande gives all these real-world examples of how people are using checklists to make a real difference.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that. Let's get practical.
Okay.
We talked about those venture capitalists, the ones who used checklists to improve their investment decisions.
The airline captains.
Yeah, what were their results like? Did it actually make a difference?
Well, study found that those airline captain VCs, the ones who consistently use checklists, actually had much higher returns than those who relied more on intuition or gut feelings.
So even in a field that's often seen as like intuitive, a more systematic approach can actually lead to better outcomes.
It's about taking the emotion out of it and focusing on the facts.
I like that. But what about for everyday people like us? Can checklists really help in our daily lives?
Absolutely. Think about something as simple as packing for a trip.
Okay.
How many times have you gotten to your destination and realized you forgot something essential, like your toothbrush or your phone charger?
Oh my gosh, all the time. I'm the queen of forgetting things when I travel. It's so stressful.
Exactly. And that's where a simple packing checklist can be a game changer.
Okay, so it's like taking the stress out of it.
It eliminates that last-minute panic and makes sure you have everything you need. You can even have different checklists for different types of trips, business vacation camping.
Ah, that's a good idea.
To make packing even more efficient.
Like specialized checklists.
Exactly.
So it's like having a personal assistant, but on paper.
Right. And it's not just about remembering things. Checklists can also help us stay focused and productive, especially when we're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, like when you have a million things going on.
Exactly. Think about your daily work tasks, or even those household chores that tend to pile up. Creating a checklist can help you break down those overwhelming projects into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right.
It's way less daunting to tackle a task when you can actually see your progress.
It's like gamifying your to-do list.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh.
Checking out those boxes can be so satisfying, and that sense of accomplishment can really keep you motivated.
I like that. But checklists aren't just for individuals, right? We talked about how surgical checklists actually improve teamwork and communication in the operating room.
Absolutely. And that same principle can be applied to any team project. Whether you're launching a new product, planning a big event, or even coordinating a family vacation.
So it's about getting everyone on the same page.
Exactly. Making sure everyone knows their responsibilities and that no crucial steps get missed.
So it's like a shared roadmap for success.
Precisely. And even beyond those specific tasks, checklists can help us develop better habits and routines.
Like what kind of habits?
Well, think about those healthy habits. We all want to cultivate exercising regularly, eating healthy, getting enough sleep.
Yeah, those are always a struggle.
It's easy to let those good intentions slide, especially when life gets busy. But by actually creating a daily or weekly checklist that includes those desired habits, you're more likely to stick with them.
So it's like a visual reminder to hold yourself accountable.
Exactly. It's like having a coach built into your checklist.
Yeah.
And over time, those actions become ingrained habits that require less and less conscious effort.
So it's the power of consistency, and checklists can help us build that.
Exactly. But I know what you're thinking. What about those times when we need to think outside the box? Be creative, improvise. Do checklists stifle that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's a common concern. But Gawande argues that checklists can actually free our minds to be more creative. By taking care of those routine tasks and reducing errors, we create space for those truly innovative ideas.
It's like decluttering your mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how something so simple can have such a big impact on the way we think and work.
So after this deep dive into the world of checklists, what's your biggest takeaway? What's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
For me, the key message is that checklists aren't just for certain professions. They're for everyone who wants to perform better, reduce those errors, and achieve more consistency in any area of their life.
And it's not about finding the perfect pre-made checklist. It's about creating a system that works for you, right?
Exactly. Experiment, iterate, and don't be afraid to adapt those checklists as your needs change.
And most importantly, have fun with it. Checklists can actually be a really enjoyable tool for personal growth.
Absolutely.
So embrace the power of the checklist, and who knows what you might accomplish.
Yeah, possibilities are endless.
This is The Deep Dive. Signing off until next time.